Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hearing Homelessness, Voices from DC's Unhoused Community, hosted by Smithsonian Curator Jim Deutsch. I'm Lisa Martin with Silver Spring Town Center, and we're so glad you could join us for tonight's topic, which is a very important one to us all. We also have another program that explores the issue of homelessness coming up on Wednesday, March 9th. It's a theatrical performance, a one-woman show created by Wanda Whiteside of Live Gara Theater, and it's actually based on a real woman who lives in downtown Silver Spring. And the program is called Nepantla Place, a one-woman show, and that will be Wednesday, March 9th at 7 p.m. We are also celebrating Women's History Month this month with an array of programs, including our 2 Women in the Arts panels. We have our Senior Women in the Arts also on March 9th, but at 2 o'clock, it's part of our Sparkle program we do in collaboration with Silver Spring Village. And then we have our 5th annual Women in the Arts panel, Local Women Explore Creativity, Identity, and Resilience. And that's hosted by blues artist Stacy Brooks, with an array of women to be featured. We are also bringing back Jackie Hoisted, artist Jackie Hoisted, who currently has her program, has an exhibition at Stone Tower Gallery in Glen Echo. And she presented her program with us 2 years ago, just as COVID was underway, about fungi and the intermingling of fungi, art, and technology. And so she finally has realized her work in an exhibition at Glen Echo, which is showing through the end of the month. On weekends, you can see it at the Tower Gallery, Stone Tower Gallery. And the program is called Symbiotica, the intersection of fungi, art, and technology, an interactive art installation exploring symbiotic relationships with artist Jackie Hoisted. And she will be joined by special guests, Irish poet Enda Coyle Green, Pennsylvania poet Barbara Crooker, and readings from the work of Irish poet Jane Clark. And it is in the eve of St. Patrick's Day. Jackie is paying a nod to her own Irish roots. She's originally from Ireland, but lives in Montgomery County. And that should be a very interesting program on Wednesday, March 16th. I am hosting a program in celebration of Peace Corps Week. Today is Peace Corps Day. It was formed 61 years ago today, March 1st of 1961. And I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, having served in the former Soviet Union in what was then the newly formed country of Estonia. And we invite returned Peace Corps volunteers and former Peace Corps staff to join us tomorrow night at 7 for a virtual Peace Corps Museum Share and Tell. And then we have so many events going on. We have a really exciting event coming up. There's a huge interest in go-go music in DC, and photographer Chip Pye just released his photography book, DC Go-Go 10 Years Backstage. That's March 24th at 7:30. All of these events are virtual. We are going back to in-person outdoor events in May. And all of our events are made possible with generous support from Montgomery County, United Therapeutics, the Arts and Humanities of Montgomery County, Montgomery College, Maryland State Arts, and many others. And also, I should mention, we have our women, we have a woman artist featured this month, Marilee Mojica, who will be presenting Machisma, Evoking a Woman's Power. And that's her in-studio presentation on Monday, March 14th. So I'll put our newsletter link in the chat, which has all the links to all of our programs. You just click the orange button, and you can connect to that. And now let's get started with the program. I've known Jim Deutsch since 2001. It's been over 20 years. We've been friends. We were colleagues. I was on the festival staff. He's a curator at Smithsonian. I was on the Smithsonian Folklife Festival staff way back in 2001. And it was just an awesome experience. And Jim is a treasure trove of knowledge and research. I mean, he's constantly onto a new topic. I mean, if you mention a topic, Jim has probably written at least a paper on it. And I mentioned my Peace Corps country of service, Estonia. He's also been following the Estonian Song and Dance Festival, which I participate in every 5 years. And we were there together in 1999. I mean, sorry, 2019.
Yeah.
In 2019. And hopefully we'll be able to go back in 2024. Anyway, Jim is also a longtime friend of the Peace Corps. He presented a program on the Peace Corps through the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. His other programs included Hungary, China, Circus Arts, Apollo Theater, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Mekong River, U.S. Forest Service, World War II, the Silk Road, and White House workers. In addition, he serves as an adjunct professor teaching courses on American film history and folklore in the American Studies Department at George Washington University. Jim has also taught American Studies classes at universities in Armenia, Belarus, Bulgaria, Germany, Kyrgyzstan, Norway, Poland, and Turkey. And now I turn it over to you, Jim. Take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Lisa. Yeah, I'm always happy to be doing one of these programs with the Silver Spring Town Center. As Lisa mentioned, I have a lot of different research interests, and one of those research interests is homelessness. It's something that I have explored both at the university level, writing articles and papers for academic conferences, for encyclopedias on the phenomenon of homelessness in the United States. But it's something that I also have been researching by interviewing people who have been experiencing homelessness. I guess my first formal interview was 1998. But I came to Washington in the fall of 1982 to start a PhD program at George Washington University. And while I was, I guess, in my first year there, Miriam's Kitchen opened in the Western Presbyterian Church, just a few blocks from the GW campus. And I started volunteering there once a week and continued to volunteer there once a week until 1991, until 1992, which is when I started teaching overseas, going to Germany. Based on those experiences, I have gotten to know a fair amount of people who are experiencing homelessness in Washington, DC. And when Lisa asked if there might be something I could talk about, this came to mind because it is such an ongoing and very visible problem, and not just in Washington, DC. And I think it's important for us to hear the voices of people experiencing homelessness. And that's going to be the focus of this presentation. You're going to see a lot of text on the screen as I transcribe the interviews that I have recorded. So without further ado, let's see. Okay, this is the definition from the US government, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, defining homelessness, referring people who reside in emergency shelters, transitional housing, domestic violence shelters, runaway youth shelters, safe havens, or places not meant for human habitation, such as streets, parks, alleys, abandoned buildings, and stairways. And I would say that most of the work that I do is with that latter group, the people who are sleeping outdoors, not in shelters. Some of the people I've talked to may go in and out of shelters, but most of the people I have interviewed certainly are in this latter category. And in terms of numbers, so every January, the Department of Housing and Urban Development with the US Census Bureau conducts what they call a point-in-time survey to try to gather the numbers, and it's on usually one night where they'll go out, they'll count the number of people in emergency shelters, they'll count the number of people in transitional housing, they'll look for people outdoors, and that is, they acknowledge that is a very serious undercount because they don't know where people are sleeping. They'll look on streets for people sleeping in doorways, under bridges, in tents that are visible, but most of the people I know do not want to be seen, and they're sleeping in places where they will not be seen. What that actual number is for outdoors and unsheltered, we don't know. Now, this number has been declining, at least based on the point-in-time survey. It's been declining for about 5 years, but 5 years ago, or I guess a little, almost 6 years ago now, DC had the highest rate of homelessness of any city. And DC is a place that often attracts people who are unsheltered, and we can talk about some of those reasons, and I think that may come out. But because DC is so visible, and because the contrast of our nation's capital with homelessness, it's not hard to find very striking photos. And I've got maybe 6 photos just to show these contrasts, pointing to the White House, our public parks filled with people sleeping on park benches here in DC, or underneath the canopy of the National Theater. Visually, these images are very powerful, and they're especially troubling for people outside of Washington, DC, questioning how can the United States allow this to happen, with the Washington Monument visible. Or this picture on a heating grate outside the Department of Justice. So that's part of the visibility of homelessness. But as I said, the people I've interviewed are those who tend to be more invisible. This is the building where my office at the Smithsonian is located. It's a nondescript building. It's owned by the Smithsonian Institution, but you wouldn't know it. It's called Capitol Gallery. It's on Maryland Avenue, or well, actually the street we're looking at here is 7th Street Southwest. So it's at the corner of 7th Street Southwest and Maryland Avenue Southwest. We're directly across the street from the Federal Aviation Agency. The Hirshhorn Museum and the Air and Space Museum are about 2 blocks away. But if you look just to the right of where the man is walking, you'll see a heating grate. This is what it looks like close up. And it's a heating grate that is used by many people because it puts out a lot of heat in the winter when the wind is blowing in a certain direction. There's another heating grate on the other side of the building. And when the wind changes, that's the grate where the heat comes out. Now you can see that the owners of the building, and the Smithsonian just acquired it about a year ago from Boston Properties. And Boston Properties put these metal bars on the grate precisely to keep people from sleeping on it, but the people who need the warmth find ways to contort their bodies and in order to sleep on the grate and stay warm in the winter when there are no, or at least for them, we feel there are no other opportunities. This is the view coming up the escalator. We're right at the L'Enfant Plaza. And Joni is the woman we see in the photograph here and someone I've interviewed, at least in the before the pandemic, would sit at the top of the escalator with a sign asking people for a spare change. Across the street, so actually from the position from where I took this photo, right behind me would have been this gentleman, who we knew him as Carl Waters. Turned out that was not his real name. His real name was Trent Clearwater, and in a kind of clever way, he changed Clearwater to Carl Waters. He became very ill about a year ago and was taken to a hospital. And we understand that he's doing much better. But I would say he was in this position underneath the bridge for almost 10 years, hardly ever moving, and he would accumulate the blankets that you see to the left of him from this vantage point. And then this is another heating grate that's close to where we saw Carl, or Trent. I mean, I call him Carl because that's how he always introduced himself. That was the name he gave out. This is another grate that is more hidden by shrubbery. So these are the places in Southwest DC where people are sleeping rough, not staying in shelters. 1 year ago, I did a series of articles for our Folklife magazine, which is the online magazine for the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And I did 3 articles based upon interviews I had done that summer. So this was the first of the 3 published in July 2020. This is a couple, that's Joni, who we saw sitting at the top of the escalator, and her husband, Derek. So interviewed them, then I interviewed Alexander, who, when I first met him in probably 1984, I met him at the Library of Congress at one of the film programs in the Mary Pickford Theater, and I saw him at all the free films, the National Gallery, the Hirshhorn. He's someone who takes advantage of the free offerings. And when I first met him, he introduced himself as Alexander the Great, spelling it this way. It's kind of a nice pun on, his name is Alexander. And he's on the grate that we saw in front of, or adjacent to the building where I work. And it's where he, in fact, he's been on this grate, I would say since about 1988, even before the building in which I work was constructed. There was a heating grate that was down a set of stairs. Now it's the heating grate is at street level, but it's still the one that he favors. And my third series of interviews, or the third article, was with Jerome and Waikita. that we see in this photograph. So these are the people that most of the quotations I'll be sharing with you this evening are from, but there are some other people I've spoken with who are not the subject of articles that I wrote in the summer of 2020. One of the main topics that everyone tells me is that they feel like people aren't seeing them, that it's as if they're invisible and people are looking right through them. And this is a quote from Chris, who's someone I have not written an article about, but someone I've interviewed who has what I thought was this wonderful statement that there is a hard 30% who put their heads down like they are charging into horses. They'll lower their shoulders, they will start squinting, and then ignore him, not even acknowledge his presence. And he said, I'm bothered by people who act like they're on a separate pecking order, throwing rude remarks my way. This is a very common refrain that I hear. Just some other photographs, not my photographs, of people being passed by. These quotes are from Joni and Derek. Homeless people are human people. I don't care what happened, how they got that way. Mine was loss of job, loss of home. A homeless person is a human being just like everybody else is. Then, I would like to hear passersby say something like, good morning. How are you? Are you okay? This is the most common sentiment that I hear people experiencing homelessness say. They keep, many of them will be out there with a bucket or something asking for money. Of course, that's always welcome, but even more welcome is some acknowledgement of them as a human being. So for people I don't know, I may not give them any money, but I will say hello, ask how they're doing. That to me is one of the most important things that all of us can do, is just offer this recognition of fellow human beings. Why is it not advancing? Okay. Now here's, this is from Waikita and Jerome. People think all the homeless are the same, but they all have different stories. Some have been abused, and that actually is the case here. Some have been abused and have fled in other situations and are afraid to go to a sheltered place or to even ask for help because they always get looked down on. I was in that same boat, and I know how it feels. The majority of people who are homeless, they have situations. Some are ex-military. People look down on them because of their situation. But if you sit and talk to them, the majority of them will have a story and it's like, whoa, now I understand. And that's, again, the sentiment that I hear over and over is, I would like you to take the time and understand my situation. And as they say here, everyone has a different story. But they're looking for kind of recognition, looking for understanding. This idea of, whoa, now I understand. This was a guy named James that I interviewed in one of the churches on Capitol Hill, saying, there has to be a sense of security for people who are on the street. We're humans. You just can't walk by, and especially with this pandemic and everything, where's the protection for us? Who's looking out for us? Or do you just say, oh, well, they're homeless, let them stay there? Oh, sorry, this was Joni and Derek, not James. I've got something from James later. Yeah, because this quotation, a lot of people are even afraid are even afraid to even come near us, like we were a pandemic, like we were a coronavirus or something like that. As I've said, that's one of the things that the people I've met, it's what irks them the most is this avoidance, their seeming invisibility. Yeah, this is from Jerome and Waikita. There's nowhere for us to go to the bathroom. If the restaurants are open, like McDonald's, you can't even get in to use a restroom. This is kind of, one of the changes of life during the pandemic. You have to get rid of it somewhere. And that actually was the hook for the series of articles that came out on the summer of 2021, was how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting cultures in DC, in the US, outside the US. Different members from the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage contributed in different ways, and my contribution was looking specifically at homelessness how the pandemic has been affected those who are experiencing homelessness. So this is kind of one of the first questions people ask is, well, what is your situation? And this came from my interview with Waikita, who, when she was young, her mother started experiencing homelessness. So Waikita told me, there was something in my heart. I just had to keep looking for my mom because she was homeless. So I dropped out of high school. I just kept looking for my mom. When I did find my mom, I was 17 at that time. And my father put me out, so her parents were separated. When she located her mother, her father threw her out of the house. I was staying outside with her. We used to sleep near the McPherson Square metro station. We would sleep on park benches. You've probably seen those park benches that are always occupied. We would sleep on park benches. We would sleep in parking garages. We would sleep under bridges, wherever they could find a place. And she also describes it this way: I used to ride around on buses all night. Some of the buses, she would just sleep on the bus. I would ride around on buses all night and then wake up. It would be like 4 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd go find my mom. I'd sleep on a park bench all day because she'd been up all night on the buses or sleeping very fitfully on a bus. I'd sleep on a park bench and she would watch my back because her mother had been sleeping. Then when my mother got sick, I enrolled myself so her mother went to a hospital. Mother got sick. I enrolled myself in college for business management, was going back and forth to the school and seeing her at the hospital. I was back to sleeping on the buses, or the nurses usually allowed me to sleep in her room because they knew what was going on, meaning they knew that she would often have to go and ride on a bus all night just to for someplace. And some of the nurses would allow her, against strict hospital policy, to sleep in the room with her mother because they knew her situation. Yeah, this is from James, who interviewed at a Methodist church on Capitol Hill, talking about life in the shelters. And that's something that people talk a lot about. As I said, the people that I interview mostly are people who are not using the shelters very much. And this is one reason why. He says a lot of these institutions, these shelters, force you to become dependent. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Whoever agreed to be vulnerable, they, meaning the shelters, they tell you you're stupid, you're ugly, you're this, that, and the other. It's all subliminal. There's no incentive to work your way out. They cushion you. Now they do. It hasn't always been like that. I'm sure. It's one observation. This is from Alexander, who is the person I've gotten to know the most. I mean, as I said, I met him about 1984 or 85, and he was born in 1948, December 48, graduated from Western High School in DC, which is now the Duke Ellington School of the Arts. Grew up in Northwest DC. Graduated from high school. Then this graduated in high school in '66. There was a war going on. He was drafted, served in the army. Did not see any combat. Served, I think, 1 year in Germany. He was a good typist. Served in Germany. Then he did serve in Saigon. Came back, and his mother passed away. His father sold the house in Northwest DC and moved to Tarpon Springs, Florida. The family is Greek American, and you may know there's a large Greek American community in Tarpon Springs. His father, so in Tarpon Springs, Alexander was living with his father, but he wasn't working. And he's described it to me that he doesn't have this drive to work. Like, the American dream tells us we should have a drive to work. So he did not have this drive to work. He came back to DC. Well, so his father gave him an ultimatum saying, either you get a job or I'm going to throw you out of our house in Tarpon Springs. And he was thrown out of the house in Tarpon Springs. Came back to DC, got a job. So this would have been in the early 1970s. Got a job as a bicycle messenger, but wasn't very reliable. Lost that job, started living in SROs, single room occupancy hotels. There used to be a lot of those in DC due to development. I think they're all gone. Ended up in then the missions, and he described, he uses the analogy of the Monopoly board to describe the category of missions. You've got Marvin Gardens, but you end up in Baltic and forget the other, the purple on the Monopoly board. And then from there, you end up on a heating rate. But here's his observation about shelter. He says, the idea of home is necessary. It is in our genome. It is instinctive. There is no place like home. Foxes have holes, birds have nests. It is ubiquitous and part of our basal brain. Every creature has a need for something, some kind of homing instinct in a homing sense. And he goes on to say, I don't have a specific home. The territory itself becomes a home, and I can feel it. I go downtown to the MLK library a mile from here. Here, meaning his home in Southwest. On that heating grate we saw outside our Capitol Gallery building at the corner of 7th and Maryland. That's been his home. And when I come back, as soon as I cross the mall, meaning crossing the mall coming from MLK, I feel secure again. I know this is my 2 square blocks of home territory. So you ask, why don't you go to shelters? Why would anybody in their right mind not want a free shelter out of the elements? I say to the people, ask, why don't you go immerse yourself and you tell me, if it was such a sweet deal, why doesn't everybody stay at a shelter for free? And he goes on, if you want to know really, try it out for a night. Here's an anecdote for you. In the middle of the night, the drunk that is passed out on the cot next to you, he can't get conscious enough, so he lets loose a stream and hits you in the next bunk 2 feet away. That's a worst case scenario for you. So that's why a lot of people don't go to the shelters. This kind of stuff can happen in the night. There's also often widespread incidents of bed bugs in the shelters, or lice are endemic in some of the shelters, and the people would prefer not to sleep there if they can at all avoid it. And they avoid it often by sleeping outdoors on a heating grate. This is Alexander continuing this idea of home. The bottom line is that the urban homeless in Washington, D.C. don't create structures. We can't because of the restrictions, meaning, in D.C. we've got we've got U.S. Park Police, we've got Metropolitan Police, MPD, we've got U.S. Capitol Police, Secret Service Police, and many of the government agencies, like the FAA has its own police force. So we can't because of the restrictions. Rather, we impose ourselves in the interstices of the infrastructure. I mean, that's one of my favorite descriptions of, and this is someone with a high school education who talks like, we impose ourselves in the interstices of the infrastructure. We utilize the extant infrastructure that we tailor to our needs. There is creativity out there. And then, Alexander both metaphorically and literally imposes himself in the interstices. This is where he sleeps much of the time. And in order to sleep, you have to fit your body into the interstices of these metal grates or these metal lines on the heating grate. Yeah, so actually the one you see on the left is the heating grate on the west side of the building. The one you see on the right is the heating grate on the east side of the building. And Alexander knows, depending on the wind direction, there's a flag that flies on top of the GSA building across the street, right on 7th and D. And that tells Alexander the direction of the wind, and he knows whether the heating grate on the west side or the east side will be the one to try that night. More from Alexander. You find a place and you create an environment that satisfies your sense of home. We can't build structures, that's because of the regulations. So we find the infrastructure that is required. In my case, it is the grates. My metabolism is exothermic, meaning that I need an external heat source to keep me going. And that external heat source is the heating grates. All right, so going on, he says, I want to get some Judeo-Christian perspectives on this. And I will say Alexander attends Mass at the St. Dominic Catholic Church that is in Southwest DC regularly. The people at the church know him well. He goes to many of their programs for Bible study. They'll often show films that are religious in nature. He attends those regularly. So he often has this Judeo-Christian perspective. In Judeo-Christian mythology, basically, if you will, you have the same archetypal scriptures. So the same creation story. I will discuss this with you. And what he says here is, did Adam and Eve start out with a home? Well, after God created them, him and then her, he placed them in the Garden of Eden, Apparently they were created out just in the elements, but he placed them in the garden. At that point, all right, let's go post-lapsarian. Its vocabulary is pretty impressive. Post-lapsarian, meaning after the fall, when they got kicked out of the garden, I maintain, according to that mythology, that the whole human race became homeless at that point and has been that way ever since. So he's drawing an analogy between his homelessness and the whole human race. He's saying, according to this interpretation of post-lapsarian theology, we are all homeless or in temporary housing to some extent. The creator puts his creation in a particular place. That's the assigned home. For whatever peccadillo they, meaning Adam and Eve, got evicted, and we've been, the whole human race, all humanity, has been homeless ever since the eviction from paradise after the fall. So that's his broad perspective on the phenomenon of homelessness regarding the whole human race. So I am submitting that regardless of the fanciness of our temporary structures and accommodation, we are all essentially homeless. And everybody else, meaning everybody but the people who are literally experience homelessness, is in denial about this situation. That's the point I want to make. So he'll often go to great lengths to explain his situation. So let me turn to, oh no, sorry, this is more Alexander. Now, if you go out to California or Florida, where they're burned out with the homeless, that's different. But DC promotes taking care of the homeless because it would be a global public relations scandal every time somebody dies of hypothermia in the capital, the richest, presumably the richest nation on earth. So he finds that the social services offered by DC are very generous. He doesn't want for food, or though he does, there are groups like the Great, what's called the Great Patrol, GRATE Patrol, that's run by the St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Foggy Bottom. They provide food. Other churches, Salvation Army, provide food. He doesn't want for food, and these same organizations are always coming around with blankets. That's why Carl Waters, who we saw sitting under the bridge, had a huge pile of blankets because people were dropping off blankets every time. So in DC, there is generosity, but this is his this is his cynical interpretation. It's because they don't want this public relations scandal of someone dying of hypothermia in the capital of the US. Now here's him talking about the pre and post pandemic. In the before time, I could find copies of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post every workday, all left behind by rail commuters. And he's not, Piotr, who's a Russian man experiencing homelessness, also living in Southwest. He collects newspapers all the time, mostly from the VRE station where there's a recycling bin for newspapers. But now he says, I must travel more than a mile to where day-old newspapers are left for recycling. Keeping informed is a major shutdown. And Alexander and Pierre and others, or there's Piotr and Pierre, yeah. Piotr is the Russian, Pierre is not Russian, not French either, but despite the name of Pierre, but they would all hang out in the museums or the libraries. But when the museums closed, I lost my social integrity. I felt myself returning to a constant state of vanity, vapidity, emptiness, futility, melancholy, ennui, uselessness, and sloth. I mean, that's the way he talks, which was my condition when I was living in the SROs. So that when he was in the single room occupancy hotels, he would hardly ever go out. He had this sense of vapidity, ennui, uselessness, and sloth that he is able to overcome, or was able to overcome pre-pandemic, by going to all the museums. And many of my fellow curators at the Smithsonian know these guys because they go to their public programs. They ask intelligent questions. They're the ideal museum visitor in some ways, except that they're dressed in rags, many of them. Okay, here's kind of Alexander's, so this is from my interview with him in July 2021. Observation about where we are at the moment. World War I was a catastrophic, world-changing, sea-changing event, which reshaped the geopolitical conditions of the world at that time. Today is like July 1914. The Archduke has been assassinated. And we're talking about Sarajevo. What happened in Sarajevo in July 1914. There has been saber rattling all through. Now, he said this before what's happening in Ukraine at this time. There has been saber rattling all through Europe. So the prevailing opinion was this is not going to last for long. I mean, he's talking about the First World War. This is not going to last for long, people thought. It's just a flare up and it will be taken care of. Little did they know, it was the worst war in human history up to that point, and has set the stage for an even worse one. I am hoping for a scientific medical breakthrough in our understanding of how things work in nature from this virus. We are getting closer. I mean, the world is going to change when we can psychophysically enter cyberspace. Now, this is his imagination. He's very much into science fiction. The best we have now is virtual reality, but there is a cyber conversion function that is coming. There is a major paradigm shift in the relatively near future, and the shift is about to hit the fan. And he acknowledges that that phrase came from a Hollywood screenwriter and director, Tom Shadyac, who had this nice turn of phrase about the paradigm shift is about to hit the fan. The fan has been turned on with the coronavirus, and there's enough stuff that's ready to hit it. That's Alexander, not Tom Shadyac. And this was his kind of final question to me, of the interview I was doing. Is there a practical use for this oral history? Or does it stop in the ivory towers of academia? Is it just an intellectual exercise? Or do the people who are interested in issues of the vulnerable, might they get exposure to some of these oral histories? Is there some practical trickle down? That's my question for you. And that's something we can talk about among ourselves, is what are some next steps? And this was a kind of the final word from Jerome. When I asked him, what can we do? What can people who are not experiencing homelessness do? And his response was always tell them, that is the people experiencing homelessness, don't give up. I went through the same thing. And Jerome and Waikita now have housing. After their struggles for many years, Waikita was the one whose mother was homeless. She was sleeping on park benches, sleeping on buses. She met Jerome, who was someone also experiencing homelessness, but they have at least, for the last 2 or 3 years, they are now housed and sheltered. So he's saying, I went through the same thing and you will be okay. And this final thing, coming back to what I said at the beginning of listening, so his advice, just listen to them, let them know they are not alone. So that's what I had prepared. I know, some of us will want to kind of listen to the State of the Union. I think the preliminaries are going to start in 35 minutes or so, but I wanted to save a lot of time for questions. This is my email address. Feel free to contact me if you'd like to talk more specifically about this, but I think I will now stop sharing the screen.
Thank
So,
you so much, Jim. That was really an enlightening and intriguing discussion, presentation. And I have also personally probably had more than the usual interaction with people experiencing homelessness. I'm from San Diego, which was always
yeah.
a chosen site for people have flocked to San Diego because it's one of the easiest places to live outdoors year round because it's so dry. Not so much that it's warm, but it's dry. And being wet is not easy to do. I mean, if you've ever camped outside or, backpacked across Europe, I've been drenched in rain and I can't imagine living outdoors in constant dampness and cold. But as I was chatting with you before the program too, I live in Foggy Bottom, and there's a huge, just in the last few years, it's really grown the community of people living in tents here in Foggy Bottom. Now there's a new group, dozens of tents near the Kennedy Center, which is kind of the opposite of poverty to it's the elites. You think of elites going to the Kennedy Center, and the Watergate is right around the corner as well. So we know that number, 5,111 of DC's homeless population is underrepresented. And I don't know what a solution is, but we have some interesting comments, I think, among our attendees. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments. So feel free to unmute yourself. I saw that we had Reverend Mansfield Casey Caseman here, who was appointed and just recently retired as the interfaith liaison for Montgomery County. So please let us know if you have any questions or comments for Jim. Let's see, let's put it in gallery mode here so I can see better. Okay, don't be shy. You're welcome to put your comments or questions in the chat too. Oh, I see. Jean Walker is raising her hand. Jean, go ahead, please.
Well, just nobody was saying anything, so I thought I'd start the ball rolling, but always I look straight at people, whether they're homeless or homed. And I say good morning, I greet them, I do not ignore them. I think one of the most important things is to acknowledge their existence. And I also was volunteering at the National Building Museum before some things took place with my health. And there were a number who used to come there, and they would sit at a table. One man, I swear he read every newspaper he could possibly get his hands on. He was so knowledgeable. I always wished my son would come along and they could talk together. That would have been something. And, and then one day he came in and he was very agitated, and that was because his tent was gone. Not only his tent, but all his belongings. And I never saw him again. And I've always wondered whatever happened to him. There was a woman who I befriended. I used to keep her stuff at home for the winter clothes in my house. And because when you're living in a shelter, you don't have a lot of space. There are no storage bins for you other than your locker. So that was a couple of years ago, a number. But I think the most important is don't just walk by. Don't, and particularly even if someone says something to you, definitely answer them. you know, maybe you could walk by otherwise, but I just think that the most important thing is to give them the respect that they're another human being. So that's my say on this. So, and thank you for your presentation, Jim.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jean. And that's exactly what people tell me is they, yeah, what irks them the most is when people do not acknowledge. And I have to say, you know, it's some of these individuals, they look,
I know, yeah.
yeah, but you have to, you just have to
Just look at
see,
them.
well, sort of see the humanity
Yes,
and recognize that and acknowledge that.
right.
You know, that's what it's what Chris, that quote from Chris at the beginning of the people who kind of squint and put their shoulders down as if they're charging into horses. It's not easy to confront, and I, you know, I will admit that some people, or at least all the people I've interviewed, are people who are lucid, who are, I mean, they may be quirky, but they're lucid, and they're not victims of alcohol or drug abuse, which I know there are some people on the streets who are abusing alcohol or drugs. And those people can be threatening if they're high or something. So it's hard for those of us who are not experiencing homelessness of how to acknowledge. But I appreciate everything that you're doing, Jean, and I know that that is appreciated by the people who are the beneficiaries of your humanity.
I appreciate the individuals that I had a longer term relationship with and learned about their lives and things that had happened. And so it was a mutual benefit. And I also then, you know, contribute and do some volunteer work with the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. Yeah, we should be ashamed of ourselves that we have homeless people. It happens. It happens. Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jean. Yeah, I mean, we wonder, we're the wealthiest nation in the world. California is the 5th wealthiest if it were a nation, yet we have so many homeless everywhere. And, you know, we shouldn't call them homeless. They're people experiencing homelessness. I have to keep reminding myself sometimes to use the proper language, because we have to acknowledge the humanity of these people experiencing homelessness. I mean, I personally I know someone, a woman who is my mom's age, in her mid-70s, who lives outside my window in a tent, and has been there the last 2 or 3 years. But actually her tent is gone, and I take it as a good sign that she's been housed somewhere, because a lot of people have recently been moved out, and I think they've been housed, as I was talking to Jim before the program. Do you know anything about that, Jim? Like, was there an effort with the city to house people during the cold?
Yes, there is a law in DC that stipulates that below a certain temperature, they do open more shelters to prevent people from dying of hypothermia. And then, as Alexander was saying, DC has a pretty good record of trying to find accommodation. Not always successful, and people are still suspicious or skeptical. But unlike other cities, and some of the cities, I think San Diego was one of them at one time. I know Phoenix, Arizona was one, where they were arresting people for
Loitering,
yeah, or some
existing.
some type of
Mhm.
charge. And that's just some of the historical research I've done. That's that this problem of being unhoused or unsheltered, or Alexander sometimes says, no fixed address. It's far from a recent phenomenon. There have been people throughout U.S. history who have been, and the charges historically were vagrancy. You could be arrested for vagrancy. So it's a problem that has long been with us and is often treated, that the US has this idea of we believe in independence and we believe in self-reliance. And this is one of the issues in our current political climate, is to what extent should the government provide for people who in many cases are victims of forces beyond their control. There are a lot of people in one of the political parties that feels that the government, that it's not the government's responsibility to take care of these people. And of course, I believe it is. And I think the people with whom I've been working also feel that our system does have this responsibility. But there's been a lot of feeling of survival of the fittest. You take care of yourself. You lift yourself up by your bootstraps, or whatever the expression is, and you take care of yourself. It's not my responsibility to take care of you, is the sentiment that you often hear expressed. And it's led to the situation that we're facing, where people often are victims of forces beyond their control.
Right.
I hear similar stories of people who had a job, but they did not have health insurance. They had a serious illness, hospital bills of $50,000. They could not pay. They lost their home, and then it's not hard when you lose. At first, if you lose your home, you will try to stay with relatives, try to stay with friends, but that can last only so long.
Right.
That's a very temporary solution. And even, close friends may say, look, it's been 2 months, 3 months, whatever, is there someplace else you can go? And they may, but eventually they'll end up on a heating grate or in a tent or in some unfortunate circumstance. And once you've hit that level, it is very hard to extricate yourself. And I know that there are some, or at least the people with whom I talk tell me there are some wonderful caseworkers, social workers, who are doing everything they can to help them, in some cases to find housing. So Alexander's a veteran. He uses the VA facilities for medical care. He once told me he spent close to a year in a VA hospital where they were doing a study. And he said it was, the best year of his life, because they took care of him, anything he wanted. And there was he wasn't required to have a kind of a daily 9-to-5 job. But that study ended. And, I was saying that there are some wonderful social workers around town, but the number of cases is overwhelming, I think. And
Right.
there's no way that our current social safety net can take care of all the people in need. Oh, I see we have a question from Mary. Is it cheaper for the taxpayers to house the homeless rather than spend the money on healthcare costs? I think so. That a lot of these people, I'll see them and they'll have a wristband, meaning they've recently been to an emergency room, and that is very expensive care. So I think in the long run, yes, it makes much more sense to provide housing for people who cannot afford it, rather than try to have this Band-Aid approach, which often ends, I think, in the long run, ends up costing us more.
I was actually in the ER at GW near where I live in December for something with I had something in my eye, that a piece of contact I couldn't get out. And a lot of the people, it was a very cold night, one of the first cold nights of the year. And a lot of the people there, I think, were experiencing homelessness. And so I think, and you could overhear some of the conversations. So there is that expense of the healthcare system treating people for minor things, just so people have a warm place to go. So the system is failing these people. There's also you mentioned that a certain political party doesn't want to use tax dollars to help these people, many of which are new homeless, recently employed and housed, and just like the rest of us, but they've fallen in hard times. In fact, as statistics say that according to CBS News in 2019, I just looked up, CBS says 40% of all Americans are only one paycheck away from being homeless, but the numbers are estimated to be as high as 59% in more recent years. So there's the issue, to the point of the right who think they're right on this issue. They say that, in addition to people being responsible for themselves, the government it's a more libertarian stance. The government should not force people to do anything, because I think the people on the left would think that it's more humane to force people into housing, but there's the argument that people are choosing to be homeless. And I mean, just anecdotally, and the people I've known who were homeless would tell me, oh, I have my sister, or my parents, but I don't want to live with them. I'd rather be on the street, or I don't want to be in the shelter because of all the unpleasantness and the dangers and the sanitation issues. So a lot of people choose to be on the street. And then people are homeless even if they're couch surfing, or using I think a lot of people who are in transition are using Airbnb. That's really, people who are on the verge of being homeless are using Airbnb because they've lost their permanent residence. From what I've read, did you encounter anyone mentioning Airbnb?
No, people I know will often, in a transition phase, they will live in a car until the car is repossessed. But I haven't heard about Airbnb. I think that's got to be more expensive than most of these people can afford.
Right, but I think it's a kind of a stopgap. That I've read, and I know people who do Airbnb. There's also the notion of passing, like throughout history, we've had passing as white among African Americans who could pass as white, during the Jim Crow era, for example. I think there are homeless people who pass as housed. What did you observe about that?
Oh, definitely. Yes, there are, which is why that point in time survey is certainly an undercount, because these are people who may be sleeping in cars,
Mm-hmm.
who may go to work every day and or go to work many days or work out as day laborers, and their co-workers have no idea that they are unhoused. Yeah, and they, exactly as you say, Lisa, they are passing as sheltered when they are not. None of the people I've interviewed had kids who were in school, but I've heard that there are some kids who are sleeping in shelters, and their classmates do not know that. And of course, they do not want their classmates to find that out.
It would be devastating for them.
Yeah, because of the stigmas that are attached. So yeah, it's an unusual type of passing for something that you are not, to keep it under wraps, so to speak.
Yeah, the woman that I've lived in my building in Foggy Bottom for over 20 years. And the woman that I know, I knew her through some of the free embassy events going back, 15 or more years. And I would see her, and I had some friends in common with her. She has my emails, sometimes emails me things. And I mentioned to one of her friends, I said, I know she's homeless, and they didn't believe me. And I said, I see her sleeping in the bus shelter at 3 a.m. when when I've been driving home late at night, or, midnight, or 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I see her there, but I also see her going, she would sometimes have the money to go and stay into the pay by the week building. But then eventually in the last couple of years, she got a tent, a blue and yellow tent, nod to Ukraine. It was not intentional on her part, but she, I could see her outside my window, but she's recently been relocated, and I'm hoping it's to housing somewhere. But I would see her and, talk to her as if she was any other normal acquaintance I had. She also worked part-time at the Kennedy Center as an usher and at the Listener Auditorium. So I would see her at events all the time and talk to her about the events. So she was still able to kind of pull that off, even though she was fully homeless by that point. But that was just before COVID, and I don't think she works any longer at those venues, and she is about 75 now. And from what I know of her history, she had worked for the federal government. So I don't know, I would think she would have enough of a pension to survive, but maybe she didn't meet the eligibility in some way and only has Social Security. But as far as I know, she has no drug or alcohol problems or any evident mental illness. So we see someone in the chat mentioning there is this study. Let's see, who says that? Diane says there was a study by the Alliance for Homelessness that states the cost of homelessness is over $35,000 per year for each homeless person. It is medical care plus police, fire, social workers are all cost borne by taxpayers. So it still costs money on the system, even if we do nothing, is basically what she's saying here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that number actually seems low to me.
35,000.
35,000. But yeah, there are, these are the costs that are often hidden. Because the police do respond, the social workers respond, hospitals, medical workers respond. Yeah, fire. I see the DC Fire Department sends out those, medical trucks and I've called them a couple times where I found someone who was barely responsive, just lying on the street. Someone I didn't know, but someone clearly in need of medical attention. And it's
Right, and people will pass. There will be someone lying in the street, and they appear to be homeless, and many people will just ignore them, but they could need care. So it's a good reminder to see their humanity, as someone else pointed out early on in the conversation. It's but I don't know what the solution is, other than to press for more care. I know in Silver Spring there are great programs like at Progress Place and Shepherd's Table, which helps feed the homeless, people experiencing homelessness. I mean, even the outdoor performances we do on the plaza, I've had more than one comment from mental health professionals who tell me that these kind of programs, just having some ambient performances, music or dance or some activity, is helpful for mental health of people in the community, regardless of who they are. But also specifically for those experiencing homelessness. Jennifer says, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. We have time for another question or two if there's anyone out there who would like to make a comment or final thoughts.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that unfortunately, I don't have. I should say that there are no easy solutions. And this is something that I talk about with the people I encounter, or the people I've gotten to know well, is what can we do? And people often say, just as I ended the presentation with, I think the comment from Jerome, which is, tell them, I'm with you. I'm with you in spirit. I'm with you, and we can work through this together. And that thing, at least he's someone who was able to overcome homelessness, saying that things will get better.
And what kind of recommendations do you have? I know that in hearing from people who are experiencing homelessness, they say they don't want to receive like meals or food or even leftover food from your restaurant plate, and I wouldn't want to eat it either. So I know they can't trust it. So I personally will give gift cards to eateries, Starbucks, for example, because it's right near where these people I know are. And I also, when it's getting cold, I'll buy some hand heat warmer things and leave them out. I've bought boxes of those and left them out. But I mean, I can't afford to do as much as I would like to do. But what do you recommend people do, and in addition to maybe supporting some of the better nonprofits who are helping?
Yeah, well, that's also a great suggestion, Lisa, is that, since I work for the Smithsonian, we participate in what's called the Combined Federal Campaign. And so every year I donate to Street Sense Media, which is a newspaper in Washington, D.C. Yeah, Street Sense. I think if you go to Street Sense or streetsensemedia.org, you can see their issues. And they have articles written by people experiencing homelessness, and their vendors are people who are often experiencing homelessness or are in or out of shelters. And I think the recommended price from a vendor is $2. And the way it works is the vendor gets to keep $1 and gives the other dollar back to Street Sense. So I give to Street Sense, I give to Miriam's Kitchen, I give to DC Central Kitchen, National Coalition for the Homeless. These are the organizations that I feel are doing, and I'm sure there are others, but these are the ones that I know personally.
And we have Manna Food in Montgomery County, which also does good work in feeding. And so others may eat, some,
right.
SOME. I mentioned I was a Return Peace Corps volunteer. We used to work with some of these different food pantries to box food. But there's also the criticism that a lot of the food that gets donated, that's in these boxes is not very healthy. Like you'll get macaroni and cheese and, but it's better than nothing.
Well, to his credit, Jose Andres
Yes,
is amazing. And
he
the food that his, what's it called, World Central Kitchen prepares, that food is amazingly.
Have you eaten some of it? You've eaten
Yes, I
some of
have.
it?
Yes, I have, because
Okay.
sometimes people will have they will have gotten more food than they can eat themselves. And actually, I have an arrangement where people know that almost every night at 8 o'clock, I make myself available, 8 p.m. And that's when some of us will gather and share the bounty that's been collected that day. And a lot of them have gotten food from from Jose Andres, and they're full, and they'll share it. So yes, I have. It's amazing what he can do. He was using the kitchen at the Nationals baseball stadium for a while when the Nationals weren't playing there. I'm not sure what he's using now, but and I believe he's now giving food to people leaving Ukraine who are arriving at the Polish border. So this guy is
Wow, he's phenomenal.
He is phenomenal.
He's great. And he's a DC resident.
He's a DC resident. He's got something like 5 restaurants.
Long time here, yeah.
5 restaurants in DC. So definitely somebody worth, in my opinion, worth supporting, because his heart is in absolutely the right place.
He's definitely a local hero, in addition to being a great chef. I love Haleo, and he's got a new tapas place in Bethesda I was at a few months ago. I can't remember the name of it, among other places. And he's my hero for political reasons as well.
Yeah.
Jose Andres.
Well, he goes where he's needed. When when there was the hurricane in Puerto Rico and the government was failing in its response, he was there.
Yeah, he's great. And I just sat in on a program with Smithsonian Bakers for Social Justice. I mean, there are a lot of people that work in the food industry that are kind of combining their social justice and humanitarian interests with their work. So it's interesting. Great. Well, this has been great, Jim. And I know you're in Chicago tonight, so you are in a hotel.
I'm in that's why there's this strange curtain behind me. It's a Hampton Inn. But it's a weird hotel. It's owned by Hilton, and there are 3 different hotels in the same building. There's a Hampton Inn, there's a Home 2 Hilton, and there's a Hilton Garden Inn, all in the same high rise. Each hotel has a different elevator.
Oh, that's weird. And that's right in downtown Chicago?
It's by McCormick Place, which is south of the Loop. So I can see, if I look north, I can see the skyscrapers, but this is because I'm doing research at the University of Chicago, which is on the south side tomorrow.
And what's your research involving?
It's on Zora Neale Hurston.
Well, great. Well, we're going to have to invite you back for that.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm going to find what I'm looking for. It's about the illustrations for her 1935 book, Mules and Men.
Oh,
And the papers of one of the original illustrators, those papers are at the University of Chicago, but I'm not sure I'll find much. But since I'm going to a conference in Milwaukee, I figured I could spend time in Chicago on the way and
okay.
work out.
And
So-
what other projects do you have going on right now?
Well, the paper I'm giving in Milwaukee on Thursday is about deaf culture.
Oh, right. I want to invite you for that. I belong to the Death what is it called? Death Cafe group
Oh.
just on Facebook, and I've wanted to have a program on that topic.
Well, I mean, in DC, we have Gallaudet University. They are
Oh, deaf culture. I thought you said
Deaf.
deaf.
deaf. No,
Deaf.
DEAF. Yeah.
So I
deaf
didn't hear you.
culture.
Deaf
Deaf culture.
culture. Okay, great. Well, we'll have to have you back for that. But if
Oh.
you study death culture too, preparing to die,
Yeah.
that could be interesting. There are some groups out there that
Yes.
explore that topic as well. But deaf culture, great. Well, good.
All right.
And will the Smithsonian Folklife Festival be happening this summer?
It is, fingers crossed. It is
Ah.
scheduled to take place, I think, starting June 24th.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's, I think, June 24th through 28th, and then July 1st through the 5th.
Right. And can you say what the topics are?
Yeah, the topics are United Arab Emirates, UAE, and a program on Earth optimism, which is about
Mhm.
environmental sustainability.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Jim
All right,
Deutsch.
well, thank
It
you
was
for
another
inviting.
wonderful program. I've said it before. You're our most frequented speaker. I don't know. This marks, how many times have you spoken with us?
I've lost count. It's I think only
8 or
6.
10.
I think it's more 6 or 7, but I'll have to
I
look.
think it's the 4th time since COVID.
Oh, okay. Well, that may be, yeah.
Because you've been in great demand, and we always love having you. So,
All right.
all right. Well, thanks so much again, Jim
Yep.
Deutsch, and everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Okay. Good night.